My brother thought he was breaking into my empty apartment to steal whatever valuables I had left behind. He used his copied brass key, completely unaware that I had strategically moved out the night before. And he certainly did not know that a highly trained 90-pound federal canine unit was standing in the dark hallway, waiting for him to push that door open. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to systematically sever ties with a toxic family that viewed your hard-earned success as their personal emergency fund. I am Harper. I am 31 years old, and I work as a financial technology fraud investigator at a global payment corporation headquartered in New York City. My daily life revolves around tracking dirty money, identifying compromised corporate networks, and locking sophisticated criminals out of secure financial systems. I analyze human greed and structural vulnerabilities for a living. Yet for years I completely ignored the most glaring security flaw in my own life. The invisible breach occurred on a rainy Thursday evening. I returned to my Manhattan apartment after a grueling 4-day compliance conference in Chicago. The corridor of my residential building was perfectly quiet, the ambient lighting casting long shadows across the carpet. I unlocked my door, stepped inside, and dropped my luggage. To the untrained eye, the apartment was completely undisturbed. The cushions on my designer sofa were perfectly aligned. The mail was stacked neatly on the kitchen island. There were no scratch marks on the brass deadbolt, no shattered glass, and no obvious signs of a forced entry. But in my specific line of work, a visual perimeter sweep is instinctual. I walked directly into my home office. The charging cable on my glass desk was coiled in its usual spot, but my backup laptop was missing. I turned on my heel and walked straight into my bedroom, opening the bottom drawer of my heavy oak dresser where I kept a fireproof lockbox. The box, which contained $3,000 in emergency cash and a few backup hardware keys, was gone. I did not scream. I did not drop to the floor in tears, and I did not immediately dial 911 to report a burglary. Panic is an amateur response that clouds logical deduction. Instead, I walked back into my living room, sat down on my sofa, and pulled out my primary encrypted tablet. 4 months prior, I had noticed small, almost imperceptible inconsistencies in my apartment whenever I traveled. A misplaced coffee mug, a desk chair shifted 2 inches to the left, a slightly lowered thermostat. I did not confront anyone or raise alarms. I simply purchased a high-definition surveillance camera discreetly built into the internal casing of a standard air purifier and placed it on my media console. The device was hardwired directly into a secure cloud server that required biometric authentication to access. I opened the application and scrubbed through the time-stamped video feed from Wednesday afternoon. The high-resolution footage loaded instantly. I watched my front door swing open. Trent walked into my living room. My 33-year-old brother is a chronically unemployed cryptocurrency enthusiast who still lives in our parents' basement, constantly chasing phantom digital fortunes while dodging real-world responsibilities. He did not use a crowbar or pick the lock. He casually used a copied brass key. I watched him stroll into my kitchen, open the refrigerator, and drink orange juice directly from the carton. He wiped his mouth with the back of his sleeve, walked into my bedroom, and emerged a few minutes later carrying my laptop and my metal lockbox. He tucked the stolen hardware under his arm, locked the front door behind him, and casually walked away. The existence of that copied key was the result of a forced compromise I had made 2 years ago. My mother, Barbara, had engineered a massive, tearful guilt trip, demanding I give her a spare key for emergency purposes. She claimed she needed peace of mind in case I ever fell critically ill or was injured while living alone in the city. It was a classic manipulation tactic. I knew the moment the key touched her hand, she would immediately pass it over to Trent. In my parents' eyes, Trent could do absolutely no wrong. He was their golden boy, a misunderstood genius constantly on the verge of his next big digital investment breakthrough. I, on the other hand, was just the cold, calculating corporate daughter whose only real utility was subsidizing his endless string of failures. My professional training dictates a very specific, rigid protocol when dealing with a compromised asset. You do not negotiate with a thief. You do not call them to argue, you do not demand apologies, and you never warn them that they have been caught. You simply sever their access and let the system crush them. I did not call my parents to complain. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I reserved strictly for tactical emergencies. Elias answered on the first ring. Elias is my brother-in-law. He is a brilliant African-American man who served in military intelligence before transitioning to the private sector. He currently operates as the director of security for a premier luxury real estate management firm in the city. He married my older sister, Maya, 5 years ago. Maya systematically cut all ties with our toxic parents shortly after the wedding, and Elias has stood by her side ever since, acting as an impenetrable wall against their relentless emotional blackmail. I did not offer Elias a tearful explanation or seek emotional validation. I gave him a 10-second status report. "My physical perimeter is breached," I stated calmly. "Trent used a copied key to steal my hardware and $3,000 in cash. I have him on a secure video feed. I need an immediate, untraceable extraction tonight." Elias operates with cold, predatory efficiency. He did not offer useless sympathy or ask redundant questions. "Pack your essential documents and secure your primary workstations." Elias replied, his voice a low, steady rumble over the encrypted line. "I am routing an unmarked transport van to your building loading dock in 30 minutes. You cannot sign a standard residential lease if you want to drop completely off the grid." Commercial data brokers scrape public tenant registries every 24 hours. If your name goes onto a new rental agreement today, Trent will find your new address by Monday morning. We are bypassing the public registry entirely. By the time I had packed my heavy winter coats, my server backups, and my critical documents into 2 canvas duffel bags, Elias was waiting in the service elevator. He wore a crisp charcoal suit projecting an aura of absolute authority. He used his executive override credentials to secure a penthouse-level apartment in a high-security building managed by his firm. He drafted an expedited, airtight leasing contract under the name of a dormant shell company registered in Delaware. That corporate entity shielded my true occupant identity from any public records search, effectively making me a ghost in the city. While Elias coordinated the physical extraction, I sat on the hardwood floor of my empty living room, opened my primary laptop, and launched a sequence of automated privacy scripts. I systematically opted out of every major data broker index on the internet. I erased my phone number, my email associations, and my voting registry address from the open web. I rerouted my official mail to a secure private postal box registered 2 towns away. Within 2 hours, my digital footprint tied to that apartment was completely erased. We left the bulky furniture, the television, and the kitchen appliances behind. It was a remarkably small price to pay for immediate, absolute security. But Elias was not just helping me run away. He was helping me set the board for a devastating counterstrike. As we stood in the empty hallway of my old building, preparing to leave for the final time, Elias pulled out his secure tablet. "Trent thinks he owns this space because he holds a piece of brass in his pocket," Elias said, a calculated, dangerous smile spreading across his face. "A man lacking boundaries will inevitably return to the scene of his perceived authority. He is going to come back when he runs out of that stolen cash. I did not terminate your lease or return this unit to the public market. I executed a private sublease agreement an hour ago." I tilted my head, waiting for the tactical reveal. Elias tapped the screen of his tablet, pulling up a digital dossier. I handed the keys to a professional contact of mine. His name is Vance. He is a retired Deputy United States Marshal who spent his career specializing in high-risk fugitive apprehension and explosive detection. Vance works as a private consultant now. He values extreme isolation, and he moved his gear in this morning. I stared at the profile, absorbing the sheer magnitude of what Elias had just engineered. Vance did not live alone. His partner was a purebred Belgian Malinois named Titan, a 90-pound tactical canine bred specifically to neutralize armed threats. A civilian pet barks at the mail carrier. A working dog operates on a totally different frequency. It does not issue warnings. It secures its designated zone, observes the environment, calculates the exact threat level of an intruder, and waits in the pitch-black darkness for the perfect moment to strike. We locked the door and walked away. I settled into my new, untraceable high-rise apartment, watching the city lights from behind thick, bulletproof glass. The final step of my extraction required severing the last remaining financial cord. 3 years ago, Barbara had manipulated me into adding Trent as an authorized user on my premium platinum credit card, claiming he needed it strictly for emergency groceries while he was hunting for jobs. I logged into my banking application. I located the supplementary card bearing his name. I did not temporarily suspend the account or lower the spending limit. I initiated a permanent closure protocol, annihilating his financial lifeline with a single keystroke. The trap was fully armed, and the ecosystem had violently shifted. The silence lasted until Friday morning when my phone vibrated with an automated security alert. It was a declined transaction attempt for $85 at a downtown liquor store. 10 minutes later, another alert pinged, declined transaction at a nearby electronics shop. Trent was officially out of money. The parasite was starving, stripped of his stolen funds, and completely unable to drain my credit. Panic is a highly predictable catalyst. I sat back in my chair and watched the live feed from the hallway camera Elias had left active. I knew exactly where my brother was heading, and I knew exactly what was waiting for him behind that door. I watched the timestamp on the surveillance application tick forward, entirely mesmerized by the sheer audacity displayed on the high-resolution screen. Trent did not dart around the apartment like a common criminal afraid of being caught. He moved with the slow, languid confidence of a man walking through his own personal grocery store. He opened my stainless steel refrigerator, pulled out a carton of premium orange juice, and drank it directly from the spout. He did not even bother to close the refrigerator door immediately. He stood there bathed in the cool light, letting the cold air spill out into the kitchen while he wiped his mouth with the back of his unwashed sleeve. That single action, that casual consumption of my food in my sanctuary, was not just disgusting. It was a perfect microscopic representation of our entire family dynamic. He had bypassed my front door because he possessed a physical copy of my deadbolt key. The existence of that brass key was a vulnerability I had knowingly allowed into my ecosystem 2 years ago against my better judgment. My mother Barbara had orchestrated a masterful campaign of maternal anxiety to secure it. She had cornered me during a rare Sunday dinner, her eyes brimming with manufactured tears, insisting that living alone in Manhattan was a lethal risk. She painted vivid, catastrophic scenarios. What if I collapsed from exhaustion? What if there was a medical emergency and the paramedics could not get inside? She demanded a spare key purely for her peace of mind, swearing on her life that it would remain locked in a safe at their house untouched unless a true disaster struck. But I analyze human behavior for a living, and I knew exactly what she was doing. The key was never meant for an emergency. The key was a designated supply line for Trent. In the warped architecture of my parents' minds, Trent was a visionary. He was 33 years old, perpetually unemployed, and proudly referring to himself as a crypto entrepreneur. He spent his days sitting in his childhood bedroom, losing thousands of dollars on volatile digital currencies, completely subsidized by my parents' dwindling retirement accounts. They firmly believed he was just one smart investment away from becoming a billionaire. I, on the other hand, was merely the pragmatic daughter. I had a demanding corporate career, a reliable income, and an impenetrable work ethic. In their eyes, my success was not my own. It was a communal resource. They believed that because we shared the same genetics, my bank accounts, my apartment, and my belongings were a safety net that Trent was inherently entitled to access whenever his phantom investments failed. I watched him step away from the refrigerator and walk down the hallway toward my bedroom, disappearing off a camera for exactly 4 minutes before returning with my backup laptop and my metal lockbox tucked under his arm. He did not look nervous. He looked entitled. A normal person would feel a crushing wave of betrayal watching their own flesh and blood rob them blind. But I am a financial technology fraud investigator. I spend 50 hours a week diving into the darkest corners of the global banking system. I track down offshore shell companies, I dismantle sophisticated money laundering rings, and I analyze the digital footprints of transnational syndicates. My entire career is built on understanding the mechanics of theft. When you spend your life hunting white-collar criminals, you learn to detach emotion from the equation. You learn that greed is a predictable algorithm. Trent was not a brother making a mistake. He was an unauthorized user exploiting a compromised access point. If I called my mother to confront her about the key, she would instantly launch a defensive countermeasure. She would cry, she would hyperventilate, and she would accuse me of being a ruthless, ungrateful daughter who cared more about a piece of metal than her own brother. If I called Trent to demand my property back, he would deny everything, gaslight me, and perhaps even destroy the laptop out of spite. The corporate world had taught me a fundamental, unbreakable rule of security. You do not negotiate with a threat actor. You do not argue with a parasite. You never sit down at a table to debate morality with a thief who is already digging their hands into your pockets. Arguing provides them with information. It gives them the opportunity to pivot to manipulate the narrative and to weaponize your emotions against you. When you detect a critical breach in your network, you do not send the hacker a warning email asking them to leave. You execute a hard reset. You revoke all credentials. You close the ports. You simply cut off the supply. I closed the surveillance application on my tablet. I did not shed a single tear over the loss of my hardware or the cash. I viewed the stolen items as a final permanent severance package. Trent had taken the bait, exposing the terminal rot within our family tree. He believed he had successfully executed a quiet robbery, blissfully unaware that he had just triggered an absolute lockdown of my physical and financial perimeters. The brass key in his pocket was no longer a symbol of his access. It was the instrument of his impending downfall. I sat in the quiet glow of my living room and prepared to dismantle his entire world step by calculated step. I did not dial emergency services. If I called the police, my brother would simply be arrested for a minor residential burglary. My parents would immediately drain their checking accounts to post his bail before midnight. By tomorrow morning, I would be subjected to a relentless campaign of psychological warfare. My mother would show up at my office crying in the lobby. My father would leave threatening voicemails. They would spin a narrative where I was the villain who tried to ruin my brother over a few spare dollars. I did not want a messy family feud. I wanted an absolute structural relocation. I needed to disappear from their radar entirely and let Trent walk directly into a consequence he could not manipulate. I picked up my encrypted phone and dialed a secure line. Elias answered on the second ring. Elias is my brother-in-law. He is an African-American security executive who operates as the Director of Internal Security for one of the most powerful real estate management corporations on the East Coast. Prior to entering the corporate sector, he served in military intelligence coordinating logistical extractions. He married my older sister Maya 5 years ago. When Maya realized our parents were draining her sanity to fund Trent and his delusions, she severed all ties. Elias stood beside her like an impenetrable wall, deflecting every guilt trip and threat my parents threw at them. He understands the toxic anatomy of our family perfectly. I did not waste his time with emotional exposition or tears. I gave him a clinical status report. I have a physical perimeter breach. I stated my voice perfectly level. Trent used a copied brass key to enter my apartment while I was in Chicago. He stole my backup hardware and emergency cash. I have him recorded on a secure high-definition feed. I need an untraceable relocation tonight. Elias did not ask me if I was okay. He knows I do not require emotional validation. Pack your network servers and your essential documents. Elias replied, his voice calm and authoritative. I am routing an unmarked cargo van to the service alley behind your building. I will be there in 40 minutes. I spent the next half hour moving with practiced efficiency. I did not pack my designer sofa, my flat-screen television, or my kitchen appliances. Physical comfort is entirely secondary to operational security. I packed my heavy winter clothing, my external hard drives, and my secure banking tokens into 2 large canvas duffel bags. When the heavy knock sounded at my door, I checked the optical viewer. Elias stood in the hallway wearing a dark tailored overcoat, looking like a man who dismantles corporate threats for a living. He stepped over the threshold and immediately surveyed the scratched deadbolt. You cannot simply sign a standard residential lease if you want to vanish, Elias explained as he picked up one of my heavy duffel bags. Data brokers scrape public utility registries, tenant databases, and credit inquiries every 24 hours. If your name goes on to a new rental agreement anywhere in New York City tonight, Trent will purchase your new coordinates online by Monday afternoon. We are bypassing the public registry entirely. Elias utilized his high-level executive access to a portfolio of luxury high-rise buildings managed by his corporation. He bypassed the standard tenant screening protocols and drafted an expedited leasing contract. He placed a highly secure penthouse-level apartment under the name of a dormant shell company his firm kept on retainer for high-profile clients seeking absolute anonymity. The corporate entity was a generic consulting firm registered in Delaware. It effectively shielded my true occupant identity from any public record search or skip tracer inquiry. As far as the public record was concerned, Harper no longer possessed a physical address in the state. While Elias secured my new physical fortress, I sat on the hardwood floor of my living room and initiated a comprehensive digital scrub. I opened my primary laptop and launched a sequence of automated privacy scripts I had written myself. I systematically opted out of every major data broker index on the open internet. I erased my phone number, my voting registry address, and my commercial shopping profiles. I rerouted my official mail to a secure private postal box registered under a proxy name 2 towns away. By the time the clock struck 2 in the morning, I was a digital ghost. We carried my bags down to the service elevator and loaded them into the back of the unmarked transport van Elias had procured. Before we closed the door on my old life, I looked at the empty apartment. The bare walls and abandoned furniture echoed with a hollow silence. I looked at Elias, who was standing by the doorframe tapping a code into his secure tablet. "What happens to the lease?" I asked, adjusting the collar of my coat. "I still have 8 months left on the contract. If I abandon the unit, the property management company will just change the locks tomorrow, and Trent will realize I moved." Elias looked up from his screen. A slow, calculated smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a tactical operator who had just set an inescapable snare. "He will not realize you moved," Elias replied, his voice smooth and deliberate. "A parasite always returns to the host when it gets hungry. Trent thinks this apartment belongs to him because he holds a copied key in his pocket. He assumes you will just replace the laptop and refill the cash box. He relies entirely on your predictable pacifism. I did not terminate your lease, Harper. I executed a private sublease agreement an hour ago using my administrative authority." Elias turned his tablet toward me so I could read the digital dossier glowing on the screen. The profile displayed a man with a stern jawline, a military haircut, and cold, watchful eyes. "I leased your old unit to a professional contact of mine," Elias continued. "His name is Vance. He is a retired Deputy United States Marshal who spent his career hunting violent fugitives and running tactical strike teams. He now works overnight shifts as a private security contractor. He values extreme isolation, and he does not tolerate uninvited guests." I absorbed the magnitude of the countermeasure. "You put a retired federal agent in my old apartment," I confirmed, analyzing the brilliant simplicity of the trap. Elias shook his head, his smile widening. "I put a federal canine handler in your old apartment." The implications immediately locked into place. Vance did not live alone. He brought his operational partner into the space. Titan was a purebred Belgian Malinois bred specifically for tactical law enforcement and explosive detection. A working dog of that caliber weighs 90 pounds and consists entirely of dense muscle and highly conditioned predatory instinct. A regular civilian pet might bark at a stranger or hide under a bed. A tactical canine operates on a completely different frequency. Titan was trained to clear hostile buildings, subdue armed fugitives, and protect his handler at all costs. When Vance was sleeping after an overnight shift, Titan treated the apartment as a designated secure zone. Any unauthorized entry was not merely viewed as a trespass. It was calculated as a hostile breach. He would not issue a warning growl. He would position himself in the dark hallway, coil his muscles, and wait for the intruder to cross the threshold. Trent held a copied brass key to a door that no longer opened to a vulnerable sister waiting to be extorted. He held a key to a tactical stronghold. The board was perfectly set. The digital walls were fortified. The physical asset was secure. We walked out of the apartment, and Elias locked the door behind us. We drove through the quiet city streets toward my new, untraceable penthouse. I watched the city lights blur past the window, feeling an incredible sense of clarity. My brother was preparing to walk directly into the jaws of a federal trap, and I was going to sleep soundly for the first time in years. I woke up the next morning in my new high-rise apartment as the early light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The environmental controls kept the room at a perfect 70 degrees. For the first time in my adult life, I did not wake up with a knot of anxiety in my chest, waiting for the inevitable sound of my front door unlocking. The physical relocation was a success. But an extraction protocol is entirely useless if you leave a financial backdoor wide open. I walked into my new kitchen, poured a cup of black coffee, and opened my encrypted laptop. 3 years ago, my mother Barbara had orchestrated a relentless campaign of emotional manipulation to force me into adding Trent as an authorized user on my premium platinum credit card. She claimed he desperately needed a safety net for emergency groceries and gas, while he was supposedly networking for new business ventures. I knew it was a lie. I had spent 3 years silently absorbing his pathetic charges for expensive dinners and late-night bar tabs simply to avoid my mother's screaming phone calls. But the era of my predictable pacifism was over. I logged into my banking application and located the supplementary account bearing his name. I did not temporarily suspend the card or lower the spending limit to send a warning. I initiated a permanent terminal closure protocol. I severed his financial lifeline with a single keystroke. The digital cord was cut. The new reality settled over the city. I sat at my quartz island and waited for the predictable chain of events to unfold. When you study financial fraud, you learn that a parasite deprived of its host operates on a very rigid timeline. The absolute silence lasted exactly until 11 in the morning. My phone resting on the counter vibrated with a sharp automated tone. I glanced at the screen. It was an instant notification from my primary bank. Declined transaction attempt for $140 at a downtown sports bar. 7 minutes later, a second alert pinged. Declined transaction for $40 at a nearby liquor store. I took a slow sip of my coffee and smiled. Trent was officially out of money. Whatever fraction of the $3,000 he had stolen from my lockbox was already gone, likely funneled into his worthless digital investments or handed over to cover his immediate debts. His plastic lifeline was dead. He could not buy a drink, he could not put gas in his car, and he could not fund his illusions of grandeur. Stripped of his stolen cash and completely unable to drain my credit, his arrogance was rapidly melting into pure primal panic. A desperate man does not sit down and formulate a logical plan. He defaults to his most reliable survival mechanism. He returns to the source of his entitlement. Trent firmly believed I was still sitting on my designer sofa in that vulnerable apartment, ready to absorb his temper tantrum and hand over a fresh stack of bills just to make him go away. He believed his copied brass key made him the king of my castle. He was heading straight back to the old trough, entirely unaware that the trough was completely empty. He was about to confidently shove his stolen key into a door that no longer belonged to a forgiving sister. He was about to walk blindly into the pitch-black territory of a 90-pound tactical federal canine unit. I sat at the quartz island in my secure penthouse, watching the secondary monitor on my desk. Elias had maintained administrative access to the security cameras in the hallway of my former building and routed the live high-definition feed directly into my encrypted server. I did not have to wait long. At 2 in the afternoon, a small green indicator light pulsed in the corner of my screen, signaling motion detection in the 5th-floor corridor. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the cool surface of the counter. Trent stepped out of the elevator. He looked significantly worse than he had on the surveillance footage from Wednesday. The arrogant swagger that usually carried his posture was completely gone, replaced by a jittery, desperate energy. He wore a dark hooded sweatshirt pulled up over his head and carried a heavy canvas duffel bag slung over his right shoulder. He walked with a rapid, uneven stride, his head swiveling constantly to check the empty hallway. He had spent the last few hours cut off from my financial resources. Without my platinum card, he could not pay his tabs or fund his daily habits. His twisted logic, fueled by decades of parental enabling, convinced him that my abrupt financial freeze was just a temporary temper tantrum. In his mind, I was sitting on the other side of that door, waiting to be bullied into submission. He viewed my old apartment as an unattended vault waiting to be emptied again. He marched up to the door of my former unit. He did not bother knocking. He reached into the front pocket of his jeans and pulled out the brass key he had copied. He shoved the key into the cylinder and twisted his wrist. The mechanism did not yield. On the monitor, I watched Trent frown. He pulled the key out, inspected the jagged teeth under the hallway lights, and shoved it back into the lock. He twisted harder, putting his shoulder into the motion, but the metal ground uselessly against the pins. Elias is a security professional. Standard protocol for any premium property transfer dictates that the maintenance team swaps the core lock cylinders the absolute second a new lease is signed. Trent was officially locked out. I watched his frustration boil over into rage. He kicked the base of the door his sneaker, leaving a black scuff mark on the pristine white paint. He believed I was inside and had changed the locks just to spite him further, fueling his narrative of victimization. He backed away, pacing a tight circle in the narrow corridor. He was out of options. He needed capital, and he believed the solution was resting just on the other side of that drywall. He reached into the canvas duffel bag hanging from his shoulder. When he pulled his hand out, he was holding a short forged steel crowbar painted black and designed to pry open commercial crates. He had come prepared for a physical breach. He gripped the textured handle, stepped up to the doorframe, and wedged the flat tip into the narrow gap between the door and the jamb right above the deadbolt assembly. He leaned his entire body weight against the steel bar. I watched the wood trim splinter on the monitor, small fragments of white paint chipped away falling onto the beige carpet. Trent gritted his teeth, his face contorting with physical effort. He lacked the finesse of a professional burglar, relying entirely on brute force and remaining completely ignorant of the noise he was generating. Inside the apartment, the environment was pitch black. Vance was likely asleep in the primary bedroom, recovering from a demanding overnight tactical shift. But Titan did not sleep the way humans do. A 90-pound Belgian Malinois bred for explosive detection and fugitive apprehension maintains a constant baseline level of sensory awareness. The moment the steel crowbar scraped against the brass strike plate, the working dog would have registered the anomaly. He would not whine or pace nervously. He would position himself silently in the dark hallway, his muscles coiled, his eyes adjusting to the ambient light bleeding under the door sweep. Trent repositioned his crowbar, finding a better angle of leverage. He planted his boots firmly against the carpet and threw his upper body backward. The doorframe groaned under the immense pressure. The metal strike plate began to bend, the heavy screws tearing violently out of the wooden studs. Trent gave the crowbar one final violent heave. The locking mechanism failed completely. The deadbolt tore through the splintered frame, and the heavy wooden door swung inward, hitting the interior wall with a physical force that visibly shook the hallway camera. Trent stumbled forward, losing his balance as the resistance vanished. He caught himself on the shattered doorframe, the steel crowbar still gripped tightly in his right hand. He stood at the threshold, peering into the pitch-black apartment. He expected to illuminate a space filled with my abandoned property. He expected a quiet, easy robbery. Instead, a low, guttural vibration emanated from the darkness. It was not a bark. It was a deep, rumbling growl that originated deep within a broad, muscular chest, carrying the unmistakable signature of an apex predator, registering a direct threat. Trent froze his hand, hovering inches away from the light switch. The arrogance drained from his posture, replaced by a sudden primal realization that he was not alone. The silhouette of the canine materialized in the dim hallway illumination, head-lowered, ears pinned flat against a broad skull. The dog stood perfectly still, blocking the path, waiting for a single sudden movement. A rational civilian might freeze and slowly retreat. But Trent, fueled by adrenaline and blind entitlement, tightened his grip on the steel bar. He raised the weapon above his shoulder, intending to intimidate the animal. In the highly conditioned mind of a tactical federal canine, a raised weapon is a green light for immediate suppression. The kinetic transfer was instantaneous. Titan launched forward, crossing the threshold in a blur of dark fur and coiled muscle. The impact caught Trent squarely in the chest, throwing him backward into the hallway. His boots left the carpet. He crashed hard onto the floor, his skull bouncing against the drywall. The forged steel crowbar slipped from his grasp, skittering uselessly against the baseboards. Titan did not go for the throat. He executed a flawless controlling bite. His powerful jaws locked directly onto Trent's right forearm, the exact same arm that had wielded the weapon seconds prior. The grip was unyielding, crushing through the fabric of the sweatshirt and sinking into muscle tissue. Titan pinned the intruder to the floor, using his massive body weight to neutralize any counterattack. Trent's mouth opened wide, his face contorting in an expression of raw, unadulterated agony as he thrashed his legs wildly on the carpet. Titan simply clamped down harder, shaking his head once to assert absolute dominance. The message was explicitly clear. Any further resistance would result in shredded tendons. Trent stopped fighting, laying flat on his back, weeping openly while his body trembled in shock. 15 seconds after the initial impact, a figure emerged from the dark interior of the apartment. Deputy Marshal Vance stepped into the hallway light, moving with the fluid, calculated precision of a man accustomed to midnight raids and hostile environments. He wore dark athletic shorts and a plain gray shirt. In his hands he held a black service pistol, the muzzle pointed firmly at the floor, his finger resting flat along the receiver. Vance did not shout or panic. He assessed the shattered doorframe, the discarded crowbar, and the bleeding man pinned to the floor by his partner. He processed the crime scene in a fraction of a second. Armed intruder. Threat neutralized. Vance issued a single sharp command. Titan immediately released his grip, stepping back and sitting on his haunches near Trent's head, his eyes remaining locked on the target. Vance holstered his weapon, stepped forward, grabbed Trent by the shoulder, and flipped him onto his stomach with practiced efficiency. He pulled a pair of heavy-duty tactical zip ties from his pocket, securing Trent's wrists tightly behind his back. The arrest was entirely sterile and mechanical. Vance pulled a radio from his waistband and keyed the microphone to dispatch local patrol units, identifying himself as a federal agent reporting an armed home invasion. I closed the live feed on my monitor. The perimeter had held perfectly. My brother had orchestrated his own downfall, guided entirely by his own greed. He was no longer just a nuisance stealing spare cash from his sister. He was about to be processed by the local police, transported to an emergency room under armed guard, and booked into the county jail for the felony of breaking and entering a federal law enforcement officer's residence with a deadly weapon. The physical threat was neutralized, but I knew the psychological warfare was only just beginning. I sat in the quiet of my new apartment watching the city lights when my secure phone began to vibrate against the quartz countertop. The caller identification displayed the name Barbara. I did not feel a sudden spike of anxiety or the familiar dread that used to consume me. I felt the cold, analytical focus of an auditor reviewing a predictable system failure. I picked up the device and swiped the screen to accept the call. I did not even get the chance to say hello. "Harper," my mother shrieked. Her voice did not carry the sleepy confusion or genuine concern of a normal parent. It possessed a shrill, piercing frequency fueled entirely by pure manufactured outrage. "What did you do?" she demanded, the words tumbling over each other in a frantic rush. "You set a trap for your own flesh and blood. You moved out without telling us and left a feral beast inside to attack him." I held the phone slightly away from my ear. "Your son used a forged steel crowbar to break into a locked residence occupied by a federal agent," I replied, keeping my vocal tone perfectly level. "The dog was simply executing its training protocol. He was looking for you," Barbara screamed, twisting the narrative to fit her absolute delusion. "He was worried sick because you disappeared without a word." I closed my eyes and listened to the familiar mechanics of her denial. This was not a new script. This was the exact same operational protocol my mother had utilized for decades to shield Trent from the consequences of his own actions. When Trent was 17, he drove his car into a parked vehicle because he was heavily intoxicated. Barbara did not take his keys away or march him into a police precinct. She blamed the rain-slicked roads and quietly drained her savings to pay off the other driver. When Trent was 25 and racked up massive illegal gambling debts, Barbara did not send him to a rehabilitation center. She secretly took out a second mortgage on her house to cover the deficit, claiming the betting syndicates had unfairly manipulated a naive boy. In her warped psychological architecture, Trent was a perpetual victim of circumstance, and I was the ungrateful daughter who refused to subsidize his survival. "I was carrying an empty canvas duffel bag to steal my electronics," I corrected her sharply, cutting through her delusion. "He was looking for a payout." "You are a cold, calculated monster," Barbara hissed, discarding the excuse and pivoting directly to her true objective. "Trent is sitting in a hospital ward right now, chained to a bed. His arm is torn open and the police are charging him with an armed felony. The bail bondsman requires $20,000 in cash by sunrise, or they are transferring him to a maximum security county lockup." She paused, taking a ragged breath, preparing to deliver her ultimate mandate. "You are going to wire $20,000 to my checking account right now." Barbara ordered, her voice vibrating with desperate authority. "You will pay for his bail, and you will cover every single medical bill he incurs. If you do not transfer those funds by sunrise, I swear to you, Harper, I will make you regret the day you were born." Extortion relies entirely on the concept of emotional leverage. A threat is only effective if the target actually fears the consequences of noncompliance. I stood in my pristine kitchen, looking out over the illuminated New York skyline. In the past, I might have scrambled to protect my peace. I might have sacrificed my own financial stability just to quiet the storm and appease her demands. But that dynamic was officially dead. I waited a beat, letting the silence stretch over the encrypted line before I responded. "And what exactly do you plan to do if I refuse?" I asked, my voice devoid of any emotional cadence. Barbara did not hesitate. "I will walk directly into the lobby of your fancy financial technology firm on Monday morning," she hissed. "I will stand in front of your wealthy executives and your corporate partners, and I will tell them exactly what kind of thief you really are. I will tell them you embezzled family retirement funds and left your own brother to rot in a jail cell. I will scream it until security drags me out. I will burn your pristine career to the ground until you hand over that cash." It was a calculated threat designed to trigger maximum reputational damage. In the corporate financial security sector, an employee accused of embezzling funds becomes an immediate severe liability. My mother expected me to panic. She expected a frantic daughter who would rush to transfer the money just to save her job and avoid public humiliation. She expected me to crumble. She received a crisis manager instead. "You mortgaged your reality to protect a violent felon," I stated, my tone dropping to a glacial whisper. "That debt is yours, Barbara, not mine. I do not negotiate with extortionists." I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could hear her drawing a sharp, ragged breath, preparing to launch another wave of hysterical verbal abuse. I tapped the red icon. The call terminated, plunging my apartment back into a serene, absolute silence. I immediately navigated to her contact profile and engaged a permanent network-level block. The physical line of communication was completely severed. But a data security professional knows that a blocked phone number does not neutralize a highly motivated threat actor. Narcissists do not simply accept boundaries. When you deny them access, they do not reflect on their toxic behavior or recognize their own faults. They view the rejection as an unforgivable insult. By refusing to pay the $20,000 ransom, I had not just denied them capital, I had stripped away their absolute control. Desperation breeds destructive creativity. I knew that if they could not break into my physical home or extort my checking account, they would target the very foundation of my independence. They would target my digital identity. I placed my phone on the counter and opened a new secure browser window on my primary laptop. The time for passive defense was over. I needed to fortify the perimeter before my mother or brother even thought to pivot their attack vector. I navigated directly to the administrative portals of the three major credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. I bypassed the standard consumer interfaces and utilized my industry credentials to initiate a permanent statutory security freeze on my Social Security number. The automated systems processed the requests in milliseconds. Heavy digital padlocks slammed shut across my entire credit profile. No one could open a new bank account, apply for a loan request, a credit card, or initiate a background check under my name without a multi-factor biometric authentication protocol that only I possessed. My financial armor was completely sealed and bolted to the floor. I leaned back in my chair and watched the confirmation receipts populate on my screen. My mother believed she held the ultimate leverage because she was willing to cause a public scene. She did not understand the architecture of the battlefield she had just stepped onto. She did not realize that I had already built an impenetrable fortress around my assets. I knew my enemies would not stop. I knew they would try to find a back door or execute their threat to humiliate me at my corporate headquarters. But I was ready for the escalation. Let them come to the corporate lobby. Let them bring their theatrical suburban tragedy to my fortress. I had already set the next snare, and they were walking right into it. I knew the exact balance of my parents' bank accounts without needing to look at a ledger. They had quietly drained their retirement funds years ago to subsidize my brother's endless string of failed cryptocurrency ventures. They did not have $20,000 in liquid cash to pay a bail bondsman. They could not secure a standard bank loan because their credit scores were completely ruined by their own financial enabling. With my digital borders permanently sealed and my phone line completely dead, they realized they had been boxed into a corner. They had only one desperate avenue left to force my compliance. They had to execute the exact threat my mother had screamed over the encrypted line. Since they could no longer reach my wallet from the shadows, they decided to strike directly at what they perceived to be my absolute jugular. The corporate headquarters of my financial technology firm, located right in the heart of the New York financial district. They believed that a public hysterical meltdown in front of my wealthy executives and corporate partners would shatter my professional armor and force me to hand over the ransom to buy their silence. They were preparing to march their suburban domestic chaos straight into my corporate sanctuary. They were driving into the city expecting to find a terrified daughter. They were entirely unaware that they were marching into a heavily surveilled fortress, specifically designed to identify and neutralize hostile external threats. Monday morning arrived in the financial district with a cold, biting wind cutting through the narrow avenues of New York City. The massive glass and steel skyscrapers reflected the pale morning light, projecting an aura of impenetrable corporate authority. I arrived at the headquarters of my financial technology firm at 8 in the morning. Our building is not just a workplace, it is a highly fortified data vault. The ground floor atrium is designed to intimidate and secure. It features polished Italian marble floors, frosted glass, security partitions, and multiple biometric turnstiles that dictate the flow of all foot traffic. We handle encrypted transaction ledgers for regional banks and secure international payment gateways. Absolute discretion and unshakable trust are our primary commodities. I did not hide in my office on the 30th floor. I knew my parents were coming. When a social engineering attack fails in the digital realm, the threat actor will inevitably transition to a physical confrontation. I anticipated a frontal assault, so I positioned myself squarely on the battlefield. I stood near the ground floor client intake center, holding a cup of coffee and reviewing an audit report on my encrypted tablet. I was waiting for the breach. At exactly 9:15, the heavy revolving glass doors at the front of the atrium spun rapidly. Barbara and Richard marched into the lobby. They did not resemble the aggressive, demanding extortionists from the encrypted phone call. My mother had orchestrated a visual masterpiece of suburban tragedy. She had clearly spent hours preparing her narrative. She did not wear her usual expensive jewelry or her tailored cashmere coat. She wore a faded beige cardigan and sensible flat shoes. Her hair was purposefully disheveled, hanging loosely around her face to frame her manufactured exhaustion. Richard walked half a step behind her, playing the role of the stoic, broken enforcer, wearing a heavy denim jacket and keeping his eyes glued to the floor. They entirely bypassed the standard visitor registration kiosk and headed directly toward the primary reception console. The front desk coordinator, a highly trained professional named Sarah, stood up. She maintained a polite but firm distance, asking if she could assist them. Barbara completely ignored the receptionist. She scanned the massive, sleek lobby, her eyes darting past the security guards and the decorative indoor foliage, until she locked her gaze directly onto me. The theatrical performance commenced instantly. My mother did not just cry, she wailed. The sound was high-pitched and sharp, deliberately engineered to cut right through the quiet, sophisticated hum of the corporate environment. There were 3 high-net-worth executives from a major international bank sitting in the plush waiting area, waiting for a compliance meeting. They immediately lowered their tablets, staring in absolute shock at the disruption. Barbara let her knees buckle slightly, falling against the edge of the marble reception desk and clutching her chest as if she were experiencing a physical heart attack. "Where is she?" Barbara sobbed, her voice trembling with perfectly calibrated agony. "You have a thief working in this building, my own daughter. She drained our retirement accounts. She stole our life savings and left her own brother to rot in a hospital bed. Please, I just need to speak to her. We are facing foreclosure because of her. She took everything we had." The accusation echoed off the high acoustic ceiling panels. It was a calculated, venomous lie explicitly designed to trigger a catastrophic reputational crisis in the middle of a financial security hub. In my specific industry, an employee accused of embezzling family funds becomes an immediate severe liability. Trust is the foundation of our entire corporate structure. If a client believes a fraud investigator is stealing money from her own mother, the entire firm loses credibility. My mother had meticulously planned this public ambush. She expected a very specific reaction from me. She expected me to drop my tablet in horror. She expected my face to flush bright red with embarrassment. She thought I would rush across the lobby, grab her by the arm, and frantically usher her and my father into a private, soundproof conference room. She firmly believed that once she had me behind closed doors, she could name her price. She expected me to write a $20,000 check on the spot simply to buy her silence and save my 6-figure career. She believed the sheer terror of public humiliation would break my logical resolve. She expected a frantic, terrified daughter, desperately trying to protect her corporate image. She received a cold crisis manager instead. I did not drop my coffee. I did not raise my voice. I did not attempt to loudly defend my character to the staring banking executives or the wide-eyed receptionist. I stood perfectly still, my heart rate maintaining a steady resting rhythm of 60 beats per minute. I observed my mother the way a forensic scientist observes a malware program executing its code in a sandbox environment. I watched the fake tears stream down her face. I watched Richard shift uncomfortably, realizing that the crowd was staring at them with a mixture of pity and confusion. I understood the mechanics of their desperation. Trent was currently sitting in a county jail cell facing a violent felony charge with a shattered arm and zero financial resources. The bail bondsman was waiting for cash they did not possess. They had driven into the city fueled by a toxic mixture of parental delusion and financial ruin, hoping to use my corporate sanctuary as a hostage. They thought my silence was a sign of vulnerability. They thought I was frozen in fear. They did not realize I was simply waiting for them to fully commit to their felony. I caught the eye of the director of physical security, who was already stepping out of the surveillance hub situated behind the reception desk. He had his hand resting on his radio, looking at me for an operational cue. I gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod. I had not spent the weekend cowering in my apartment waiting for this ambush. I had spent the weekend building an airtight legal perimeter. My parents thought they had brought a theatrical performance to a corporate lobby. They were entirely unaware that they had just walked onto a highly active legal battlefield, and I was about to drop the hammer. I did not rush forward to console my weeping mother. I did not attempt to whisper negotiations to my father. I maintained my position near the security partition and spoke in a clear, authoritative voice that carried effortlessly across the marble lobby. I addressed the director of physical security, who was standing on high alert. "Initiate the active threat protocol," I instructed. The corporate environment reacted with mechanical precision. The moment those words left my mouth, the atmosphere of the lobby fundamentally altered. The biometric turnstiles locked with heavy magnetic clicks, sealing access to the elevators. A sequence of subtle amber strobe lights began pulsing near the ceiling, indicating a total lockdown of the ground floor. 2 uniformed security guards flanked my parents, forming a rigid physical barrier between their theatrics and the high-net-worth clients sitting in the waiting area. My mother stopped crying immediately. Her fake tears evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer, utter confusion. The script she had meticulously memorized in her suburban kitchen was rapidly disintegrating. She looked at the towering security guards and then looked at me, her mouth slightly open. "Harper, what are you doing?" Barbara hissed, dropping the devastated victim persona and revealing the vicious extortionist underneath. "Tell them to back off and take us to your office right now. We need to talk about your brother." I walked slowly across the polished marble floor. I did not carry a pen or a checkbook. I unclasped my leather portfolio and retrieved a thick legal document bound in blue heavy stock paper. I stopped exactly 3 feet away from her, maintaining a sterile professional distance. "We are not going to a private office," I stated, my voice radiating absolute coldness. "We are not negotiating a ransom for a violent felon. You are currently standing inside a highly secure corporate facility, and you are actively violating a judicial mandate." I placed the stamped legal document flat on the smooth surface of the reception desk. It was an emergency order of protection. I had not spent my Sunday resting. I had spent it standing before a federal magistrate. I presented the judge with the verified police report detailing Trent breaking into a federal officer's residence with a steel crowbar. I then played the audio recording of the encrypted phone call where my mother explicitly threatened to orchestrate a smear campaign against my corporate firm unless I wired her $20,000. A judge requires less than 5 minutes to assess a documented threat of felony extortion. He signed the mandate granting a strict 500-foot perimeter around my person, my residence, and my place of employment. "You are in violation of an active restraining order," I informed them, pointing to the judge's signature. "The moment you bypassed the exterior plaza, you committed a criminal offense." Richard puffed out his chest, attempting to use his physical size to intimidate me and the security team. He stepped forward, pointing a thick finger at my face. "You listen to me, you ungrateful brat." Richard growled, his face flushing crimson. "We are your parents. No piece of paper is going to stop us from getting what we need to save your brother. You owe this family. Nobody is leaving this building until you transfer that cash." He did not get the chance to finish his sentence. A corporate security director does not rely on verbal warnings when dealing with an active threat. He relies on rapid systemic escalation. The silent alarm beneath the reception desk had been triggered the exact second they bypassed the visitor kiosk. The heavy glass revolving doors spun again. 4 uniformed officers from the New York Police Department walked rapidly into the atrium, their hands resting firmly near their duty belts. The lead officer approached the desk, glanced at the active restraining order I provided, and instantly turned his attention to my parents. "Sir, ma'am, you need to step back and place your hands behind your back," the officer commanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "You are trespassing and violating a protective court order." Defeat is an incredibly bitter pill for a narcissist to swallow. Barbara looked around the lobby, her eyes wide with panic. She realized the banking executives were watching her not with pity, but with intense disgust as the police moved in. She had brought a fake emotional crisis to a corporate fortress, and I had countered with the full weight of the legal system. The officers grabbed Richard's arms, twisting them firmly behind his back. The sharp metallic click of steel handcuffs echoed loudly in the pristine lobby. My father, the man who had enabled a lifetime of toxicity, was entirely neutralized. "Do not touch me!" Barbara shrieked violently, shaking her head as a female officer clamped handcuffs around her wrists. "We are the victims here. She stole from us. She is a liar." The police ignored her frantic pleas. Law enforcement operates on documented evidence, not suburban theatrics. They marched my parents across the marble floor, humiliating them in front of the entire corporate staff. The heavy revolving doors swallowed them, depositing them directly into the back of a waiting police cruiser parked on the cold city pavement. The flashing red and blue lights painted the lobby in a rhythmic glow as the vehicle pulled away, heading straight for the downtown precinct. The active threat protocol was deactivated. The amber strobe lights ceased pulsing and the magnetic locks on the turnstiles released with a soft click. The lobby returned to its quiet, sophisticated equilibrium. I picked up my leather portfolio, apologized briefly to the banking executives for the disruption, and offered them fresh coffee. I walked toward the elevator bank, my posture perfectly straight. The physical ambush had failed spectacularly, but as the elevator doors closed, taking me up to my office, I knew the war was not over. Trent was still sitting in a cell, watching his bail options evaporate. My parents were now facing criminal charges of their own. A cornered parasite does not surrender. It mutates. I prepared my digital workstations, knowing that their next attack would not happen in the physical world. It would happen in the shadows of the internet. The corporate lobby was quiet, but the echo of my parents' public humiliation reverberated through their fractured egos. They were processed at the downtown precinct and released on a minor misdemeanor charge by late afternoon. But the reality of their situation remained dire. Trent was still sitting in a maximum security holding cell facing an armed felony. He needed a massive cash bail, and my parents had zero liquid assets. Desperation forced them to make a catastrophic financial decision. Richard drove directly to a predatory hard money lender on the desolate edge of the county lines. He signed away the absolute last remaining equity in their suburban house, taking out a toxic high-interest second mortgage just to buy his son's temporary freedom. Trent returned to his childhood bedroom that evening. His right arm was heavily stitched from the tactical dog bite, and his arrogant pride was completely shattered. He had been humiliated, bitten, arrested, and forced to rely on his parents' diminishing resources. He knew physical intimidation was entirely useless against me. I had a federal agent living in my old apartment and a highly trained corporate security team guarding my office. The physical world was hostile territory for him, so he retreated to the only arena where he felt a false sense of supreme intelligence. He decided to strip away my armor in the digital realm. Trent did not just want to steal money to pay off his mounting legal fees. He wanted absolute vindictive revenge. He wanted to engineer a financial catastrophe so massive that it would completely obliterate my pristine corporate reputation. In the data security and financial technology sector, employees are subjected to continuous, rigorous background checks. A sudden massive default on unsecured credit flags an investigator as a critical security risk. It mandates immediate corporate termination and the permanent revocation of all industry licenses. Trent intended to frame me for my own financial ruin, ensuring I would lose my penthouse, my career, and my independence. He booted up his laptop and accessed a hidden network using a residential proxy service to mask his geographic location. He navigated to a dark web marketplace and utilized his remaining stolen cryptocurrency to purchase a complete compilation of my digital identity. He acquired my social security number, my previous residential addresses, my exact date of birth, and my maternal maiden name. He believed he was operating entirely in the shadows, compiling the perfect digital weapon. Armed with my pristine profile, Trent targeted 5 premium financial institutions that utilized automated algorithmic approvals. He navigated to their application portals and inputted my sensitive data. He listed a burner email address and a digital voice-over Internet Protocol phone number to intercept the automated verification checks. His strategy was a classic and venomous maneuver known as bust-out fraud. He planned to open 5 high-tier credit lines, request immediate virtual card issuance, and execute a rapid sequence of maximum cash advances. He intended to funnel $50,000 through an untraceable third-party payment processor, convert the stolen fiat currency into crypto wallets, and vanish, leaving me holding the explosive digital debt. I initiated the applications expecting the banking algorithms to process my immaculate credit score and approve the inquiries in milliseconds. He sat in the dark bedroom of my parents' house, pressing the enter key and waiting for the massive influx of stolen capital. Back in my secure office on the 30th floor, I was reviewing a client server log when a priority red alert triggered across my primary monitor. The dashboard of my proprietary credit monitoring software, usually a calm sea of green indicators, began flashing violently. 5 separate high-level inquiries were attempting to breach my financial profile simultaneously. A synthetic debt load of $50,000 was trying to attach itself to my social security number. A normal civilian would experience a total psychological collapse, watching their identity get hijacked in real time. They would spend months navigating bureaucratic red tape, arguing with banking customer service representatives, and trying to clear their name while their professional reputation disintegrated. I did not panic. I did not reach for my phone to call the banks and beg them to stop the transactions. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and watched the red alerts cascade down my screen. Trent believed he had executed a flawless financial assassination. He believed he had bypassed my defenses by attacking me through automated banking portals. He completely failed to realize the fundamental architecture of the system he was trying to hack. By launching a digital attack against a certified financial fraud investigator, he had not found a blind spot. He had just plugged his computer directly into my active surveillance grid. I smiled as the data packets flooded my terminal. The thief had just handed me the exact digital rope I needed to hang him. I sat in the quiet hum of my corporate office and watched the secondary monitor flash with a brilliant red warning. The dashboard of my proprietary credit monitoring software displayed the exact magnitude of his attack. $50,000 in phantom debt was attempting to anchor itself to my identity in real time. Trent genuinely believed he was a digital mastermind operating in the untouchable shadows of the dark web. He thought he was dismantling my life and my pristine career, keystroke by keystroke. I did not feel a single ounce of fear as the massive, fraudulent balance populated on the screen. I picked up my coffee, took a slow, deliberate sip, and let a cold smile spread across my face. My brother thought he had found an unguarded back door into my financial fortress. He was entirely unaware of the fatal error he had just committed. The thief had just plugged his cable directly into the mainframe of the exact architect who designed the security system. The digital war had officially begun, and I was about to show him what a true counterstrike looks like. I did not pick up my phone to call the customer service department of the credit bureaus. I did not intend to sit on hold listening to terrible elevator music, waiting to beg a low-level representative to cancel the fraudulent applications. That is how a regular civilian responds to identity theft. They panic and beg the system for help. But I do not ask the system for favors. I manage the system. I control the infrastructure. I closed out of the consumer-facing dashboard and launched a proprietary command line interface utilized exclusively by my firm for high-level enterprise network diagnostics. When an amateur criminal purchases stolen identity profiles on the dark web and attempts to open fraudulent credit accounts, they genuinely believe they are invisible. They purchase a cheap residential proxy service or use a virtual private network, routing their internet connection through a series of spoofed servers located in Eastern Europe or South America. They assume the bank only sees the fabricated data typed into the application portal. They think the digital mask is absolute. They completely forget that every single digital handshake leaves a distinct, undeniable biometric residue. The internet is not a magic cloak. It is a highly structured tracking grid. Because I hold a Tier 1 security clearance in the financial technology sector, I did not have to wait for a summary report from the credit bureaus. I requested the raw, unedited application packets directly from their central servers. Lines of dense alphanumeric code began cascading down my primary monitor, illuminating the dark office with a pale green glow. I watched the data compile, mapping the exact trajectory of Trent's attack. I analyzed the entry point of the fraudulent credit applications. The individual attempting to open $50,000 in debt under my name was indeed using a commercial proxy service to hide their geographic footprint. But Trent is not a sophisticated hacker. He is an arrogant amateur who watched a few tutorial videos online. He used a cheap browser-based client to mask his location. He completely failed to disable the web real-time communication protocols. When you fail to disable those specific protocols, it causes a localized domain name system leak. The proxy drops its protective shield for a fraction of a millisecond during the initial server ping to the banking website. I highlighted a specific string of raw numbers buried deep within the application packet data. I isolated the leaked ping and executed a rapid reverse trace command. The command line bypassed his cheap proxy shield effortlessly and grabbed the true origin Internet Protocol address. A geographic mapping software populated on my secondary monitor. A bright blue crosshair dropped onto a digital map of the Chicago suburbs, zeroing in on a very specific residential street. The Internet Protocol address resolved directly to a broadband account registered to Richard, my father. Trent had not even bothered to go to a public coffee shop or a library to execute his felony. He was sitting comfortably inside my parents' house, using their residential network to launch a federal wire fraud attack against me. But an Internet Protocol address only proves the location of the router. A skilled defense attorney could argue that a random hacker parked on the street outside and secretly hijacked the wireless network to commit the crime. A location is circumstantial. I needed the exact murder weapon. I tapped my mechanical keyboard, navigating deeper into the raw code. An Internet Protocol address identifies the house, but a media access control address identifies the specific piece of hardware used to pull the trigger. Every single device connected to the Internet possesses a unique physical signature hard-coded directly into its network interface card by the manufacturer. The media access control address cannot be altered by a cheap proxy service, and it cannot be easily hidden by an amateur. I extracted the alphanumeric hardware code from the fraudulent application packet. I then pulled up the historical access logs from my own home wireless network, dating back to the years when I still visited my parents' house. I ran a cross-reference algorithmic search, comparing the hardware signature from the bank application against every device that had ever connected to my parents' local network. A bright green match confirmation flashed across my screen, accompanied by a soft chime. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the monitor, my eyes scanning the granular data. The device used to steal my identity and attempt a $50,000 digital heist was not a burner phone. It was not Trent's personal laptop. The hardware signature belonged exclusively to an Apple iPad. Specifically, it was the primary tablet registered to Richard. The sheer magnitude of Trent's incompetence was almost breathtaking. He was so lazy, so utterly convinced of his own untouchable genius, that he did not even use his own device to commit a federal crime. He had walked into the living room, picked up his father's iPad, and used it to execute a major financial fraud. By doing so, he had firmly tethered the crime directly to Richard. The digital fingerprints did not point to a mysterious hacker on the dark web. They pointed directly to the patriarch of the family. My parents had mortgaged their home to buy Trent's freedom. They had marched into my corporate lobby and publicly humiliated themselves to protect him. And in return, Trent had used their own internet connection and their own personal hardware to commit aggravated identity theft. He was carelessly pulling them down into the abyss with him. I had the raw data logs, the precise timestamps, and the undeniable hardware match. The narrative they had spun to the police about being innocent victims was completely unraveling. I compiled the forensic evidence into a secure encrypted folder. I had blocked the fraudulent debt from anchoring to my profile, but I was not going to stop there. I needed to see exactly what else Trent was doing on that network. If he was stupid enough to leave his father's hardware signature on a bank application, I knew there was a massive trail of digital garbage waiting to be uncovered in his files. I initiated a deep packet inspection of the compromised IP address, preparing to follow the dirty money all the way to the source. I compiled the forensic data from the compromised hardware, but I was not satisfied with simply blocking the transaction and securing my own perimeter. I needed to see the complete architecture of his digital heist. When Trent attempted to authorize the $50,000 cash advance, he routed the funds toward a specific third-party payment processor. From there, the money was scheduled to be converted into a series of decentralized cryptocurrency wallets. The general public often misunderstands cryptocurrency, assuming it is an entirely anonymous, untraceable digital black market. That is a fundamental misconception. It is actually a public decentralized ledger. Every single transaction, every transfer, and every wallet address is permanently recorded on the blockchain. If you possess the right analytical tools and know exactly how to read the ledger, you can follow the dirty money with absolute precision. I took the receiving wallet address from Trent's failed credit application and ran it through my corporate forensic tracking software. I expected to find a few $1,000s in scattered digital coins managed by an incompetent amateur. Instead, the software returned a sprawling, highly organized network of interconnected digital accounts. My secondary monitor completely filled with hundreds of transaction nodes connecting to major overseas exchanges. The sheer volume of capital moving through that specific wallet cluster was staggering. I was looking at millions of dollars in illicit transactions flowing back and forth across international borders. The realization hit me with cold, absolute clarity. My brother was not a lone hacker orchestrating a solo fraud operation. He lacked the discipline and the intelligence to build something this massive. Trent was not a digital mastermind. He was a low-level operational mule for a highly sophisticated transnational identity fraud syndicate. In the financial security sector, we understand exactly how these specific syndicates operate. They function like massive digital supply chains. They steal Social Security numbers and use them to open premium credit lines. But they cannot simply extract the cash directly without triggering immediate anti-money laundering protocols. Instead, they use the stolen credit to purchase highly liquid physical assets online. They buy pallets of high-end laptops, premium smartphones, designer watches, and expensive graphics cards used for crypto mining. However, a criminal organization cannot ship massive quantities of stolen merchandise to an abandoned warehouse or a commercial post office box without triggering a federal red flag. They require a clean physical destination. They need a quiet, unassuming residential drop address that does not draw the attention of local law enforcement. The puzzle pieces locked together in my mind with terrifying precision. For the past year, Trent had been bragging to our parents about a booming electronic commerce startup he was managing directly from their basement. Barbara and Richard had proudly told their friends that their son was finally becoming a successful digital entrepreneur. During our sparse phone calls, my mother had frequently complained about the endless stream of commercial delivery trucks pulling up to their suburban driveway every single day. She had proudly admitted that she and my father gladly signed for the heavy boxes stacking them floor to ceiling in their living room to support his new business venture. It was not a legitimate startup. It was a black market fulfillment center. Trent was actively using my parents' pristine suburban address to receive tens of thousands of dollars in stolen electronics purchased with synthetic credit profiles. He was the ground-level logistics manager. He would receive the stolen cargo, repackage it in the basement, and ship it to overseas buyers or local fences designated by the syndicate. In exchange for utilizing his home as a criminal drop house, the syndicate would deposit a small commission into his cryptocurrency wallet. My parents genuinely believed they were supporting a misunderstood genius on the verge of incredible wealth. They had absolutely no idea that they had turned their comfortable home into an active criminal logistics hub for a violent transnational gang. By signing for those packages, they had officially become accessories to a massive money laundering operation. They were blindly enabling a $20 million fraud ring under their own roof. I stared at the glowing nodes on my monitor, processing the extreme escalation of the battlefield. Trent had not just stolen my lockbox. He had dragged my parents into the direct crosshairs of an organized criminal network. The people managing this syndicate were not constrained by the law. They did not care about suburban domestic drama. They operated on a rigid balance sheet of payment and punishment. And because my automated defenses had successfully blocked his $50,000 transaction, Trent now had a massive, unresolvable problem. He had just failed to deliver a required payment to a syndicate handler. He was currently sitting in my parents' basement surrounded by stolen merchandise with a massive target painted directly on his back. I did not call my parents to warn them. I did not text my brother to gloat about uncovering his massive criminal operation. Gloating is an emotional response, and I strictly operate on calculated forensic logic. I compiled the digital evidence into a highly encrypted dossier. I included the media access control address logs, the Internet Protocol routing history, the shipping manifests, and the blockchain wallet ledgers. I bypassed the local municipal police department entirely. Local cops deal with noise complaints and petty theft. A transnational synthetic identity ring requires a federal response. I routed the digital package directly to the Cybercrimes Task Force of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I submitted the evidence through an official corporate compliance portal, marking it as an active and ongoing threat to the financial sector. The federal response to a heavily documented multi-million-dollar money laundering operation is neither slow nor polite. The government does not send a single detective to knock on the front door and ask questions over a cup of coffee. They execute a coordinated tactical seizure. The raid occurred at dawn on Wednesday morning. I watched the localized police scanner activity populate on my monitor from the comfort of my Manhattan office. A convoy of unmarked black tactical vehicles quietly pulled onto the pristine tree-lined street of my parents' Connecticut suburb. Heavily armed agents wearing tactical vests with federal insignias stepped onto the manicured lawn. They did not ring the doorbell. They used a heavy steel battering ram to splinter the solid oak front door right off its hinges. Federal agents flooded the foyer, shouting commands and securing the perimeter. My mother Barbara was likely standing in the kitchen holding her morning coffee when the raid team swarmed her house. My father Richard was ordered to the floor, his hands zip-tied behind his back, while agents began tearing through the property. They marched directly down the wooden stairs into the basement. They found exactly what my forensic data promised: wall-to-wall pallets of stolen high-end electronics, premium laptops, and commercial crypto mining hardware waiting to be shipped. The government seized everything. Every single box, every laptop, and every piece of stolen inventory was cataloged and carried out to a heavy transport truck. But the federal agents did not find the primary target. Trent was a coward, but he possessed the basic feral survival instincts of a cornered rat. He had been sleeping in his upstairs bedroom when the battering ram shattered the front door. Hearing the heavy boots and the shouted federal commands, he did not run downstairs to protect his aging parents. He did not surrender to face the consequences of his actions. He grabbed a handful of cash, threw open his bedroom window, and climbed out onto the sloping roof of the garage. He dropped into the backyard, scrambled over the wooden fence, and sprinted blindly into the neighboring woods, leaving Barbara and Richard to face the absolute wrath of the federal justice system entirely alone. The police interrogated my parents for hours amidst the ruins of their suburban sanctuary. Because my parents were genuinely ignorant of the full scope of the syndicate, the agents eventually uncuffed them, labeling them as persons of interest rather than primary architects. The federal team departed by noon, leaving the house completely ransacked and the basement entirely empty. My parents sat in their devastated living room, surrounded by overturned furniture and shattered wood. They believed the worst part of the nightmare was over. They believed the police raid was the ultimate consequence. They were catastrophically wrong. The federal government operates strictly within the confines of the law. A transnational crime syndicate operates entirely on violence and immediate financial restitution. The criminal handlers running the logistics network had local spotters monitoring the drop house. Within an hour of the federal seizure, the syndicate realized their entire inventory had been confiscated. They did not care about police warrants or federal asset forfeiture. They operated on a rigid balance sheet, and $50,000 in retail merchandise had just vanished from their supply chain. Because Trent had abandoned his post and fled the jurisdiction, the syndicate immediately transferred the debt to the only physical asset they had on file: the suburban house and the people sitting inside it. At exactly 4 p.m, Richard's Apple iPad, the exact same device Trent had used to execute his failed credit card scam, chimed loudly on the coffee table. It was not a text message from a friend. It was an encrypted direct message sent through a secure dark web communication portal Trent had carelessly left logged in. Richard picked up the shattered tablet with trembling hands. The message was brief, stark, and incredibly lethal. "We saw the federal raid. You lost the merchandise. Your son is gone. The debt is $50,000. You have until midnight to secure the funds, or we will burn that house to the ground with you inside it." Richard dropped the tablet onto the floor. The oxygen left the room. The illusion of their safe suburban existence was permanently annihilated. Barbara stared at the threatening message glowing on the cracked screen, her mind completely unable to process the magnitude of the danger. They had spent their entire lives treating my corporate success as a backup fund and enabling my brother's toxic behavior. Now, they were sitting in a targeted home, completely isolated, hunted by heavily armed federal agents, and violently threatened by a ruthless criminal cartel. They had zero leverage, zero cash, and zero protection. And as the sun began to set over the horizon, casting long, terrifying shadows across their shattered front door, they realized they had absolutely no one left to call but the exact daughter they had just tried to destroy. I sat in my office watching the sunset paint the Manhattan skyline in shades of bruised purple and deep orange. My encrypted phone vibrated on the desk. The caller identification displayed an unknown local number, but I knew exactly who was on the other end of the line. A cornered animal will gnaw off its own leg to escape a trap, but my parents were perfectly willing to gnaw off mine instead. I accepted the call, pressing the speaker button. "Harper," my mother Barbara hissed. Her voice was completely devoid of the terrified weeping I expected. There was no desperate begging for $50,000 to pay off the syndicate. The sheer panic of the cartel threat had violently mutated into pure venomous survival instinct. "We know exactly what you did," she spat her words sharp and calculated. "Trent told us everything before he left. He left us a highly encrypted flash drive. We have the complete digital archive, Harper. We have the chat logs, the emails, and the offshore routing numbers. We have all the evidence proving you are the one running this money laundering ring. I know you used your advanced corporate security clearance to hijack our router and orchestrate this entire operation from our basement just to frame your own brother." I stared at the blinking light on my phone console. The sheer audacity of her delusion was almost architectural in its perfection. Trent had not just run away into the woods. Before he fled, he had spent his final hours in that basement compiling a forged digital dossier. He had meticulously altered the metadata and spoofed the communication headers to make it look like every single stolen laptop and every illicit crypto transaction originated directly from my secure corporate servers. And my mother, facing a syndicate execution and a severe federal indictment, was eagerly weaponizing that forgery against me. "I am walking straight into the federal courthouse tomorrow morning," Barbara declared, her tone radiating a twisted, triumphant malice. "I am handing this drive directly to the federal prosecutors. I will tell them you manipulated all of us and forced us to sign for those packages. You are going to lose your luxury penthouse and your precious corporate career. Prepare to sit in a federal prison, Harper." The line went dead. I did not move. I did not panic. My parents had officially crossed the absolute point of no return. They were no longer just toxic family members begging for cash. They were active co-conspirators planning to commit felony perjury to execute a malicious federal prosecution against me. They intended to make me the ultimate scapegoat to save their golden boy. They firmly believed they had just played a brilliant checkmate. They had absolutely no idea they were simply walking into the final execution chamber of my digital fortress. The physical wreckage of my parents' suburban home was permanently seized by the federal government under asset forfeiture statutes. But the true battlefield had shifted from a shattered living room to the austere wood-paneled chambers of the United States Federal Courthouse in Manhattan. A federal grand jury proceeding does not resemble the chaotic shouting matches depicted in daytime television. It is a closed, suffocatingly quiet environment. 23 everyday citizens sit in a tiered wooden box, tasked with reviewing evidence to determine if a formal criminal indictment should be issued. The air in the room is heavy with absolute judicial authority. I sat at the prosecution table next to the Assistant United States Attorney, acting as the primary technical witness for the government. We waited in silence as the heavy double doors at the back of the chamber swung open. 2 armed federal marshals escorted the targets of the investigation into the room. Trent had not survived long as a fugitive in the woods. Without money, a passport, or a criminal network willing to shelter him, the federal task force had tracked him down at a cheap motel within 48 hours. Now my brother, my mother, and my father wore identical oversized orange jumpsuits. The bright fabric drained the color from their skin. Heavy steel chains bound their wrists to their waists, the metal clinking a hollow rhythmic cadence against the polished hardwood floor. The arrogant suburban polish had completely eroded. Richard walked with his shoulders slumped, his intimidating posture broken by the reality of a concrete cell. Trent kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room, but Barbara retained a dangerous, venomous spark in her eyes. She did not look like a woman preparing to accept responsibility. She looked like a cornered predator preparing to strike. The legal stakes were catastrophic. The prosecution was seeking indictments under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, commonly known as the RICO statute. It is a heavy federal law originally designed to dismantle the mafia. When applied to a transnational money laundering syndicate, it carries mandatory minimum sentences that would ensure my parents and my brother died in a federal penitentiary. The federal prosecutor spent the first hour laying out the indisputable physical evidence. She presented the photographs of the stolen merchandise recovered from their basement. She submitted the fraudulent shipping manifests bearing my father's signature. She detailed the syndicate death threat sent to the iPad. The narrative painted a clear, damning portrait of a family actively facilitating a criminal enterprise. The jurors took furious notes, their expressions hardening with every piece of evidence. The indictment seemed absolutely inevitable. Then Trent's defense attorney walked to the center podium. He was a hired litigator known for relying on theatrical misdirection rather than factual defense. He did not attempt to deny the existence of the stolen goods. He did not dispute that a massive fraud operation was run out of that suburban house. He executed a calculated, ruthless pivot. He turned his gaze directly toward me and told the grand jury that they were looking at the wrong mastermind. He declared that his clients were simply the tragic collateral damage of a highly sophisticated, ruthlessly ambitious data security specialist. A collective murmur rippled through the jury box. Several jurors shifted in their seats, their eyes darting from the prisoners in orange directly to my tailored charcoal suit. The defense attorney returned to his table and picked up a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside rested the cheap prepaid flash drive Trent had compiled during his final night in the basement. The attorney handed the drive to the court clerk to be entered into the official record. He signaled his paralegal, and a large high-definition monitor facing the jury illuminated. The screen displayed rows of dense email threads, chat logs, and international routing numbers. The attorney paced in front of the jury box, pointing at the screen. He told the citizens to look closely at the Origin Internet Protocol addresses. He explicitly pointed out that the communications with the cartel did not trace back to the suburban drop house. They traced directly to the highly encrypted corporate servers managed by me at my financial technology firm. The forged documents filled the screen. Trent had spent his final hours of freedom crafting a masterpiece of digital deception. He had spoofed the network headers, altering the metadata to make it appear as though the syndicate handler was communicating directly with my personal work email. He had generated fake transaction receipts showing cryptocurrency flowing from the cartel into offshore accounts bearing my exact initials. The defense attorney leaned against the wooden podium, adopting the tone of a sympathetic storyteller. He spun a narrative where I needed a physical location to receive stolen goods, a place entirely disconnected from my luxury penthouse and my pristine corporate image. He claimed I targeted the people who trusted me most. He told the jury that I used my advanced technical clearance to hijack my parents' wireless router, orchestrating the entire $20 million fraud ring from my office, and treating my own brother as a disposable blind mule. And when the cartel closed in, he claimed I severed ties, froze their bank accounts, and pointed the federal government at my family simply to cover my own tracks. The narrative was a venomous, complete inversion of reality, but it was highly effective. It preyed perfectly upon the inherent fear everyday citizens have regarding modern technology and the invisible people who control it. To the jurors, the story made a twisted kind of logical sense, a brilliant, wealthy hacker exploiting her technologically illiterate family. To seal the performance, the defense attorney called Barbara to testify. A federal marshal escorted my mother to the witness stand. The heavy chains around her waist clanked against the wooden enclosure. She raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. Barbara delivered the absolute performance of a lifetime. She weaponized her frailty. She hunched her shoulders, gripping the edge of the microphone. When the attorney asked her to describe the events leading up to the raid, she began to weep. The tears were genuine, fueled entirely by her own self-pity and desperation. "We did not know what was in those boxes," Barbara sobbed, her voice cracking perfectly for the microphone. "Harper told us she was starting a side business repairing commercial electronics. She said she needed extra storage space. We wanted to support her. We trusted our daughter." Barbara looked directly at the jury, wiping her eyes with her chained hands. She claimed that when strange men started calling the house, Trent tried to confront me, and I threatened to ruin his life. She painted me as a corporate sociopath who could erase their bank accounts with the push of a button. She bowed her head, allowing silent sobs to shake her fragile frame, telling the courtroom that she had lost her home and her freedom because the real criminal was sitting at the prosecution table pretending to help the government. The courtroom fell into a heavy, judgmental silence. The atmosphere in the chamber violently shifted against me. I could feel the weight of 23 pairs of eyes burning into the side of my face. The jurors were no longer looking at me as a cooperative technical witness. They were looking at me as a ruthless mastermind. Several jurors scribbled furious notes on their legal pads, their expressions tight with absolute disgust. Even the federal prosecutor shifted uncomfortably in her leather chair. The confidence drained from her posture. She leaned toward me, her voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. Harper, the prosecutor, murmured, her eyes fixed on the forged emails projected on the massive screen. "The defense just introduced a documented digital trail linking the syndicate directly to your corporate servers. The jury is eating out of her hand. If we cannot authenticate the origin of that flash drive right now, I have to suspend this deposition. I will have no choice but to open a formal internal investigation into your employment records and seize your hardware." The threat of a malicious federal prosecution was rapidly materializing. If the deposition was suspended, my parents would successfully introduce reasonable doubt. The RICO charges would stall indefinitely. My corporate firm would place me on immediate administrative leave. The government would seize my laptops, and my entire career would be paralyzed by a massive federal inquiry. Trent's digital forgery, backed by my mother's theatrical tears, was on the absolute verge of collapsing my entire world. The defense attorney returned to his seat, a smug, victorious smile playing across his lips. Barbara remained in the witness box, dabbing her eyes, playing the broken victim. Trent finally looked up from the defense table, staring at me with a look of pure vindictive triumph. They genuinely believed they had won. They believed they had successfully cornered me in a room where technical jargon would overwhelm the truth. They believed I was about to be destroyed. I sat perfectly still, analyzing the trap they thought they had set and prepared to completely annihilate them. The foreperson of the grand jury, an older man with stern features, cleared his throat and looked directly at the federal prosecutor. "Does the government wish to cross-examine the witness or address the new evidence presented?" he asked, his tone laced with heavy skepticism regarding my innocence. The prosecutor hesitated, her pen hovering over her legal pad. She did not know how to counter a complex digital forgery on the fly. I did not wait for the prosecutor to request a recess or consult with her superiors. I stood up from the heavy oak table. I did not look angry. I did not look panicked. I adjusted the lapels of my charcoal suit jacket and walked slowly toward the center of the courtroom. The heavy silence stretched thick with anticipation. The jury waited for a frantic denial, a tearful defense, or a desperate plea for legal counsel. Instead, I reached into the interior pocket of my blazer. My fingers brushed against the smooth, cold metal of a secondary decrypted titanium flash drive I had prepared weeks ago in my subterranean corporate laboratory. The trap my family thought they had set for me was merely the entry point of the massive snare I had built for them. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, ready to dismantle their illusion and expose the raw, verifiable anatomy of their crime. I walked past the prosecution table and approached the wooden railing. I did not ask for a recess. I placed the small, heavy titanium drive onto the smooth surface of the wooden partition. The metallic clink echoed in the quiet chamber. "Madam Prosecutor," I said, directing my voice toward my colleague, but projecting it so the entire jury could hear. "The defense has submitted a drive containing forged email headers and altered chat logs. They claim I orchestrated the syndicate from my corporate servers to frame my brother. I am officially submitting this drive into evidence. It contains a certified encrypted data packet extracted directly from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network." The defense attorney jumped up from his chair, objecting loudly and claiming I could not introduce unverified hardware into a federal deposition. The prosecutor stood up, her sharp instincts overriding her initial confusion. She did not back down. She firmly reminded the room that I was a certified financial technology fraud investigator, holding a federal clearance well within my rights to submit authenticated counter-evidence to refute a direct accusation of perjury and federal fraud. The grand jury foreperson nodded, instructing the court technician to plug my titanium drive into the primary terminal. The massive monitor in the courtroom flickered. The forged emails Trent's attorney had displayed completely vanished. They were replaced by rows of crisp, color-coded data packets bearing the official seal of the United States Treasury Department. It did not look like a standard spreadsheet. It looked like the raw underlying code of the financial internet. I turned to face the 23 citizens sitting in the jury box. A month ago, when I first detected suspicious anomalies originating from my parents' home network, I anticipated a future escalation, I explained, keeping my tone completely clinical and detached. Knowing Trent had unmonitored access to their internet connection, I did not just monitor my own credit profile. I remotely installed a hidden protocol, a localized honeypot gateway, directly into the firmware of their residential wireless router. The jurors leaned forward, the technical terminology catching their absolute attention. A honeypot operates like a standard internet connection. I continued explaining the architecture to the silent room, but beneath the surface it functions as a deep packet inspection logger. It does not just record the websites you visit, it captures the encrypted handshakes, the biometric login telemetry, and the unique physical hardware serial numbers of every single device that connects to it. I signaled the court technician to run the primary script on my drive. Trent is not a sophisticated hacker, I stated as the massive screen began to populate with organized digital data trees. He used commercial spoofing software to change the names on those chat logs to make it look like I was talking to the cartel from my corporate office. But he forgot that a honeypot captures the media access control address. I pointed to the monitor. A bright green box highlighted a specific string of alphanumeric characters right next to every single forged email and illicit transaction his lawyer had just presented. That hardware signature belongs exclusively to a smartphone registered to Trent. I told the jury, looking directly into their eyes. Every fake credit card application, every message sent to the syndicate handlers, and every forged email originating on that defense drive was created on his physical device while he was sitting in his childhood bedroom. My corporate servers never communicated with that criminal network. His forgery only changed the paint on the digital walls. The structural foundation proves he pulled the trigger. Trent sank drastically lower into his chair. His chin rested on his chest. The arrogant defiance completely evaporated, replaced by the crushing, suffocating weight of a federal conviction. His defense attorney realized his own client had handed him fabricated evidence to present to a grand jury. He sat down slowly, his face flushed with extreme professional embarrassment. He knew his career was in severe jeopardy. But I was not finished. Exposing my brother was merely a defensive maneuver to clear my name. The true payload of the data drive was designed to permanently dismantle the entire illusion my parents had constructed. Barbara sat in the witness box, her fake tears drying instantly. She stared at the massive monitor, a cold, absolute dread washing over her pale face. She realized the digital net had captured absolutely everyone in the house. My mother just testified under oath that she was a terrified, innocent bystander, I said, my voice echoing loudly in the silent judicial chamber. She claimed that she thought the massive boxes of electronics stacked in her basement were for a legitimate repair business. She claimed she mortgaged her home solely to protect her son from people she did not understand. I nodded to the technician again. The screen shifted away from Trent's chat logs and opened a highly encrypted offshore banking ledger. The protocol I installed recorded significantly more than just my brother's activities. I revealed locking eyes with my mother. It recorded the administrative login credentials for a series of virtual cryptocurrency wallets utilized by the syndicate. I turned back to the jury, ensuring they understood the mechanics of the financial crime. The defense wants you to believe my parents are technologically illiterate victims, I explained. But in the modern financial system, converting stolen cryptocurrency into usable cash requires strict compliance. To move syndicate money into a suburban bank account, you must satisfy federal identity regulations. It requires biometric authentication. It requires a live fingerprint scan on a registered physical device. The courtroom monitor displayed the login timestamps cross-referenced perfectly with the delivery dates of the stolen freight. I pointed to the registration details of the primary laundering wallet. That cryptocurrency account does not belong to Trent. I declared, letting the sheer magnitude of their greed fill the courtroom. The account is legally registered under the names Barbara and Richard. They did not just sign for packages blindly. They logged into the syndicate financial portal every single time a shipment of stolen laptops cleared their basement. The screen flashed showing the biometric verification logs approved by the system. The data proves they received a 15% commission on the wholesale value of every stolen item processed through their property. I continued my words, striking like heavy hammer blows against their crumbling facade. And to authorize the transfer of that dirty money from the cartel into their checking account, someone had to press their finger against the biometric scanner of the tablet located in their kitchen. The forensic data confirms the fingerprint scan to accept the syndicate blood money belongs exclusively to Barbara. The entire courtroom remained paralyzed. The jurors completely stopped taking notes. They simply stared at the undeniable mathematical proof of a family enterprise built entirely on theft and deception. They were not victims forced into compliance by a violent cartel. They were active, compensated logistics partners. They used those illicit commissions to fund their suburban lifestyle and maintain their illusion of superiority. They knowingly laundered syndicate money and then sat in a federal courthouse crying fake tears to frame their own daughter for the crime. The illusion shattered permanently. The fragile weeping mother routine my mother had weaponized for 30 years was completely dead. She sat in the wooden witness box, stripped of her manipulative lies, exposed as a willing participant in a transnational fencing operation. Richard stared straight ahead, his eyes totally vacant, realizing he would spend the rest of his natural life sleeping on a thin mattress in a concrete federal cell. Trent was practically hyperventilating. The collapse of their defense was absolute. Every single argument their high-priced attorney had prepared was obliterated by raw, verifiable data. The lies were stripped away, leaving them completely naked before the law. The grand jury was visibly furious. Citizens do not appreciate being manipulated by criminals pretending to be victims. The sympathy that had filled the room just 10 minutes prior was replaced by a cold, rigid demand for justice. The federal prosecutor stood up from the table. She did not look at the defense attorney. She looked directly at the grand jury foreperson. The clinical precision of the financial evidence had handed her an unprecedented legal victory. In light of this authenticated digital telemetry from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, the government is modifying its official request, the prosecutor announced, her voice cold and unyielding. The evidence proves a coordinated, ongoing criminal conspiracy involving all three individuals. We are formally requesting this grand jury issue true bills of indictment for Barbara and Richard under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, identical to the charges facing their son. The defense attorney did not stand up to object. He closed his thick leather binder, signaling the absolute end of his legal defense. The foreperson of the grand jury nodded firmly, the disgust incredibly evident on his face as he looked down at the three prisoners wearing orange jumpsuits. He picked up his wooden gavel and struck the sounding block with a sharp, echoing crack that signaled the absolute end of their freedom. The federal marshals stepped forward immediately, gripping the heavy steel chains binding my family and ordering them to their feet. The snare had snapped shut, and there was no escape. Trent did not attempt to fight or argue. The sheer weight of the federal indictment crushed whatever remaining defiance he held. He simply collapsed forward, letting his forehead hit the heavy oak defense table, while his chained hands shook uncontrollably. Barbara, however, did not accept defeat quietly. The fragile mask of the weeping suburban mother completely shattered, revealing the feral, toxic entity underneath. As the federal marshals moved in to physically secure her and drag her out of the witness box, she began to scream. She thrashed violently against the heavy steel chains, hurling venomous curses across the quiet courtroom directly at me. She blamed me for her ruin, completely oblivious to the reality that her own greed and her own physical fingerprints had sealed her absolute fate. The echo of the judge's gavel finalized their destruction. The United States government had already officially seized their pristine suburban property under federal asset forfeiture laws, permanently liquidating the very home they had used to harbor a transnational criminal syndicate. They lost absolutely everything. They were stripped of their assets, stripped of their false dignity, and completely stripped of their freedom. They were no longer the arrogant manipulators who viewed my corporate success as their personal bank account. They were federal inmates being forcefully dragged out of the judicial chamber, facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years in a maximum security penitentiary. The parasitic ecosystem that had drained my energy for decades was permanently and utterly annihilated. The heavy wooden doors of the federal courtroom closed firmly behind me, shutting away the chaos and the consequences. The sound of my mother's frantic screaming echoing against the wood-paneled walls slowly faded into the sterile quiet of the federal corridors. I did not stop walking. I did not turn around to take one final look at the people who raised me. Looking back is an emotional reflex driven by nostalgia and guilt, and I simply do not operate on those vulnerable frequencies. I packed my encrypted titanium drive into my leather briefcase, snapped the solid brass latches shut, and walked steadily past the armed guards stationed at the security checkpoint. I pushed open the heavy glass exit doors of the United States Courthouse and stepped out into the crisp, bright afternoon. The sky over Manhattan was a brilliant, unobstructed blue, reflecting off the towering glass skyscrapers of the financial district. The chaotic noise of the city, the blaring horns of yellow taxis, the rush of pedestrians, and the distant low hum of the subway system felt incredibly peaceful. It was the sound of absolute freedom. The cold autumn air tasted clean, rushing into my lungs and clearing away the final lingering traces of my toxic childhood. I walked down the wide granite steps of the courthouse, my posture perfectly straight. Elias was waiting for me near the bottom of the staircase, leaning casually against the side of a black corporate security SUV. He wore his tailored charcoal overcoat, projecting the same calm, predatory efficiency he utilized to extract me from my old apartment. He did not rush forward to hug me. He did not ask me if I was holding up okay or offer any useless emotional platitudes. He simply looked at me and offered a slow, quiet nod of absolute understanding. The physical perimeter was permanently secured. The digital firewall was completely fortified. The hostile threat was entirely neutralized. I offered a slight smile in return, got into the waiting vehicle, and let the city absorb me back into its rhythm. Society constantly conditions us to believe that a shared bloodline is an unconditional lifetime contract. From the moment we are born, we are taught to endure emotional decay, financial manipulation, and blatant psychological abuse, simply because the individuals inflicting the damage happen to share our genetics. We are told to keep the peace, to absorb the toxicity, and to always forgive the unforgivable, because family is supposed to come first. We are conditioned to believe that setting a rigid boundary is an act of supreme selfishness. But true security and genuine survival require a ruthless, honest audit of your inner circle. You do not owe your future to people who treat your hard-earned success as their personal communal goldmine. You do not owe a single ounce of loyalty to a toxic network that actively seeks to compromise your sanity and is perfectly willing to sacrifice your entire existence just to save themselves from the consequences of their own actions. When a person carrying your own DNA decides that your independence is a threat to their comfort, they cease to be family. They become an active liability. I build advanced digital firewalls for a living. I spend my days locking sophisticated criminals out of global financial systems. But the absolute most important security perimeter I ever constructed was the boundary I drew around my own life. I monitored the network. I identified the malicious threats operating from within. I severed the infected nodes, and I completely purged the malware from my system. My name is Harper. I am a financial technology fraud investigator. I track digital ghosts, I dismantle corporate threats, and I absolutely never negotiate with extortionists who try to hide behind the title of family. Thank you for listening to my file on silent vengeance. If you have ever had to execute a permanent hard reset on a toxic family dynamic to protect your own peace, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and share your survival story below. I will see you in the next one. Society constantly dictates that family must always come first. We are conditioned from birth to believe that sharing genetic material creates an unbreakable bond that demands endless sacrifice and absolute forgiveness. But when individuals who carry your exact DNA view your hard-earned success as their personal goldmine and treat your very existence as a convenient sacrificial lamb to cover their own crimes, you have a fundamental choice to make. You can either let the parasite drain your entire system, or you can step up to the panel and manually pull the plug. I chose to flip the breaker. I am Harper. I catch financial criminals for a living. I dismantle corrupt networks and trace digital ghosts. And I absolutely never negotiate with extortionists operating under the convenient title of blood relatives. Thank you for listening to my file on silent vengeance. If you have ever had to sever the connection to a toxic family member to protect your own peace, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your survival story in the comments below. I will see you in the next file.